Hello and welcome to another exciting Blender tutorial. I'm Chris Bailey, and today we're going to be making this super cool microchip landscape. Let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to be building out this microchip landscape using a lot of cool procedural techniques. I hope you're really excited. Just a reminder, you can find the full version of this tutorial on Patreon. If you go check that out, it's about 2 hours long, a lot of cut content, a lot of things where I'm trying to figure everything out. Really worth your time if you want to check that out. Also, you can get that on YouTube if you become a channel member at the All Access Pass level. All right, let's jump in and get started. I'm going to start with a fresh scene. So I'm just going to go over here, File, New, and I'm not going to save that. There we go, fresh scene. We're going to hit A and X to delete everything. Okay, so first thing we want to do is lay out our landscape. So let's go ahead and hit Shift A and create a plane. I'm going to scale it right up. And I'm also going to go ahead and create my microchip, or at least a starting object to represent the microchip. So I'm going to create the cube and I'll scale it on the Z. So G and Z, and then S and Z to scale it down, and then G and Z and bring it up a little bit. So it's just intersecting the plane there. Now let's go ahead and open up our shader editor, and we're going to get some shader action happening. So I'll come right here and I'll switch this window over to my shader editor, just the little button up in the top right corner. All right, now let's click the plane and we're going to create a new material. So with the plane selected, you could come over here to the material tab right down at the bottom and click new. Or in this window with the object selected, you can click new, and it does the same thing. It just starts us off with a new principled BSDF connected to the material output. Now let's go ahead and turn on rendering. Now we're not going to see anything yet, and this is Eevee, by the way. So I'm going to come over to my render tab. I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion, bloom, and screen space reflections. Now, with all these things turned on, we don't have any lights, no any cameras. Things are looking pretty bland, but that's all right. Let's go ahead and add in a light. So I'm going to go Shift A, Light, Sun Lamp. And I'll just tilt it off to the side a little bit by hitting R and then moving my mouse just to get a little bit of a side light. I'll go ahead and create a camera as well so I can start thinking about my frame. So I'm going to hit 0 on the number keypad to jump into my camera. And I'm just going to roll my mouse wheel to zoom in a little bit so the view's a bit larger. And then I'm going to come down to my camera tab, go to Viewport Display, and I'm going to turn up Passport 2. And that's just going to darken the outside of my frame so I can focus on what's actually going to be in my render. Then I'm going to come over to this little hidden dropout menu. Just click that little triangle and go to View, and I'm going to lock my camera to View. This is something you'll do pretty much every time, any project. I'm always doing this just to set up a camera. All right, so there's a rough kind of angle. I might go for a wide angle, like an 18mm lens, and just kind of pop right in here like so. We can adjust this more later. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn off my camera to view. Now I can just zoom in and out on the view without changing the camera. So I'll zoom in a little bit so we've got a nice clean view of our space. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to create a couple of nodes. I'm going to create a Voronoi node, so the Voronoi texture node. I'm going to create a texture coordinate node just in case we need it. I'm going to create a color ramp. So the texture coordinate node, that tells Blender how to place a texture on an object. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's all these different options, but it basically is always telling Blender how to position a texture on an object. Next is the Voronoi texture, and this one is going to create a noise pattern across our object that's infinite and it's random and it's generated by an algorithm. So it's really powerful and useful. Color ramp is going to clamp that image and give it a gradient from black to white that we can control. Okay, so let's plug all these in and start doing stuff. By default, Blender uses the generated coordinate. So if I plug this in, it's going to be exactly the same as if I didn't plug it in. So I might leave it unplugged for now. I'll take the distance into the factor, and I'll take the color ramp, and I'm going to pop this into the emission. All right, now our object's going to glow and start getting bright, and that's because emission is emitting light into our scene. And we can kind of see what's going on, but not really from this view. So I'm going to pop out of this view and zoom out so we can see this thing. Now we got these round shapes. We're going to change this from Euclidean. We're going to go to, let's see, we'll go to Manhattan. And I'm going to take my color ramp and I'm going to switch from linear, which is the interpolation between these two colors. So it's a linear interpolation. So you get this gradual fall off. I'm going to switch this to constant. So now there's no fall off. And now you can see it gives you these hard edges. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this black pip right here, and I'm going to click the plus symbol, and it'll create another one. If you click it over here, it'll make it white, so you can just change the color just right down here. And I'm going to bring it over to the other side. And this will allow my to create just lines, basically. So I can bring this white pip in really close to make these nice and small. And then I can come over here and I can give it some color. So I can like turn it up or something like that. And let's see, what else? I can turn the strength up and start getting some glow. And we can also add in, probably add in like another color as well. So I can click here and click one more time and then take this one in between these two, brighten it up and give it like a neon pink or whatever you want color. Now we got this cool pattern, right? Now I can take my base color and drop it down to black if I want. We might bring this up a bit because I think things are going to get really dark soon. So I might keep it up at kind of a middle gray. And I'm going to turn my roughness down to let it really reflect the environment. Now I want to create some bump on this pattern. So I'm going to create a bump node. And what I want to do is have something similar for the bump node as this. So I'm going to grab the Verona, I'm going to duplicate it, bring it down, and I will create a new color ramp. And then we're going to connect the distance into the factor, just like we did before, color into the height, so just the height of the bump node, and now the normal into the normal. Now, if you're not familiar with normals, I've got a lot of stuff where I talk about it in my tutorials, but the basic is we're faking geometry. That's what normals are. A normal is the direction a polygon faces. And so by affecting where the polygons are facing with a texture, you're basically telling Blender to render it as if there's more detail, there's more faces pointing in directions. It kind of knows how to behave when light hits an object. So that's how you get little bumps across things without having to add thousands of polygons to create that geometry. I'm going to drag these in so they're a bit closer together, and you can see we start getting this bump that kind of outlines our glowy bits, which is pretty cool. I might make this system separate though. So I'm going to drag my scale down, and now I've just got a bunch of really nice panels, and that's going to be a nice look. I think this is what I want to go for. All right, now we've got this section here. Let's zoom back in. Let's jump into our camera and let's take this and let's think about how we can make it work within the view. So I might take the scale of my bump down even more, so it's really tiny, and then I'm going to take my strength down so it's not too pronounced. I don't want it to like really stand out. And I think with my other system up here, I'll take the scale down as well. I want to line it up though. So you see how like these lines are going in a different direction from my cube. So I want to line this system up. So we are going to create this. I'm going to create a mapping node. Okay. The mapping node is just a way of changing the way a texture is placed on an object. So I'm going to need my texture coordinate to use this. So we're going to use generated because remember that's just the default, so it's already doing. But for the mapping node, you have to plug one in. There's no default for the mapping node. And then I'll plug this in here. So nothing's going to happen. This is the same as what we had before in terms of what's happening in the math behind the scenes. But now what I can do is I can rotate this 45 degrees on the Z, and it's going to line up. So it's going to turn the whole system so that it's the same direction as my cube. Now I can do the same thing with my bump. But I kind of like that it's a little different. It's sort of an aesthetic choice. You can decide what you want to do with yours, but I think I'm going to leave mine. I'm going to drag this in so these lines are a bit thinner. All right, great. Let's take this object and let's Shift D to duplicate, grab Z and bring it up. So we have like a ceiling to our world. And I want to go ahead and start getting some depth into this space. Okay, so we can't see off into the distance. So I'm going to come over here to Object. We're still in the shader editor. I'm going to switch from object to world. And now what I can do is I can make a shader for my world, which your world is this sort of gray sphere that's surrounding everything. Right here, you can change the color of it, but we want to add some volume to this to kind of add some mist or some depth to the scene. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go Shift A and I'm going to search for a volume scatter node. I'll drop that down and I'll go ahead and plug this straight in, and instantly things are going to go dark. I'm going to take the anisotropy and bring it right down. Anisotropy, I really don't know how to say that, to be honest. And I'm going to take my density down. I'm going to hold down Shift. That's a great way to slowly move my numbers. You don't have to move them in such high increments. And I'm just going to drag this around until I start losing that background, so things kind of fade out. Basically, we're adding like smoke to the scene in a sense, right? Okay, so now with all that set up, let's keep moving forward. We're going to go ahead and do our microchip now. So I'm going to take my cube. I'm going to turn my handles back on so I can see what's going on. And I'm going to come over here to modifiers and the little wrench icon. And I'm going to add in a bevel modifier to this guy. And I will increase the segments maybe to 3, I think. Looks pretty good. Now, it's a bit hard to see. Our sun lamp, I could probably try rotating it around until I can see a bit more. Yeah, there we go. Find a nice angle. We could actually use this in our scene. That's pretty cool. All right, I'm going to right click on this object and I'm going to click Shade Smooth. Then I'm going to come down to this green icon down here, which is the data icon, object data properties. And I'm going to go to my normals and I'm going to turn on auto smooth. Shade smooth basically means that whenever you have an angle that's less than 30 degrees, it's going to shade it as if it's smooth. If it's greater than 30 degrees, it's going to shade it as if it's a hard angle. So it's just a nice little way to give a nicer look to your geometry. Now I'm going to go in here and I'll enter edit mode. Actually, we're also going to add one other modifier. We're going to add in the weighted normal modifier. And this is another kind of little trick to just kind of make things look crisp without having to add too much geometry to them. All right, I'm going to come in here to edit mode by hitting tab, and that will allow me to edit the geometry here. And I'm going to hit I to inset, and I'm going to drag in a little bit, and then G and Z. And that'll create this extra little face here. And then I'm gonna do it one more time. I'll hit E and I'll grab Z, drag this up and scale it in like so. And then what we can do is, let's see, I wanna take this group right here and I'm gonna create a material for this object actually first. So let's select the object and I'm gonna click new material. But then what I'm gonna do is I click this little plus symbol and I'm gonna go back into here and I'm going to create another new material. And this time I'm going to click assign, and that's going to assign this second material to the faces that I have selected. I'm going to switch this from a principled BSDF to an emission shader. Now that's the same as if I came over here to my object. I could show you if we just go back to principled BSDF, you can see that the node changed in the node tree. So this is actually just the same as changing whatever the main node is. So it's just a bit quicker than coming in and going Shift A, search, emission, grab that and then plug that in and then delete this. It's the same process. So now I can turn the strength up of this guy and you can see we've got this glowy bit just here on our microchip, which looks pretty cool. Now I might take the body of my microchip, so this first material, and I'll bring the base color down for this. I'm going to turn the metallic up, which will make it behave like metal. I'll turn specular up and I'll bring the roughness down so it starts reflecting the environment a bit. And now let's see, I might bring it down a little bit. It looks pretty cool. All right, now next thing we want to do is, actually I'll add in a little bit of color to this so it's not just white. I'll take it to the blue spectrum a little bit. That looks kind of nice. And I might make it a little smaller. I feel like it's a bit too big. So I'm gonna go into edge mode, hold down Alt, click this to get this edge loop. Double tap G and that will slide that edge along the other edges that it's connected to. So it kind of keeps its shape. It's a really handy trick. So there we go. That looks a little bit better. And I can come back over to this and turn the strength up on that right there. Okay, cool. Now, the next thing we need to do is create the microchip lines, right? The wiring, the circuitry wiring, right? And that's kind of a tricky effect because if you think about it, it's a lot of lines that follow specific patterns and they all kind of go together, right? And that would take forever to model if we were doing this like by hand. So we're going to use a trick to simplify the process so we don't have to model hundreds and thousands of these things. We can just do a few and then let it play out across the entire design. All right, so I'm going to select my top plane and I'm just going to hide it. I'm also going to go ahead and turn on with the little toggles filter here. I'm going to turn on show in the screen and render. So I can see these. These are really important because we need to make sure that if we hide something here and then forget about it and go to render, it will render as if it's visible because we've got the render icon turned on. So, and this is hide it from the display port, which is very similar to just hiding it. Anyways, okay, let's hide this. And so that way we can look down on everything and see it a bit clearer. I'm going to go back into my just flat shaded mode. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go Shift A and I'm going to create a path. A path is just what it is. It's a path. It's a line, basically. I'm going to delete those center vertices, so I just have two. And then I'm going to grab this one, G, X, and I'm just going to slide it forward a little bit. And then I'll grab this whole thing and I'll bring it right over to the edge of my microchip. Make sure it's just right there on the edge of my line. Yeah, that looks good. Now, what we can do with the path is we can take it and we can add a bit of geometry to it. If we come over here under the Geometry tab, and we can extrude it. So I can make this like 0.01, for example, And if I zoom in on it by hitting full stop on my number keypad, you can see it's extruded it out, but it's going up and down. I want this thing to be flat, right? So what I can do is I can open up this side menu. I can go into edit mode and hit A to make sure everything's selected. So I've selected all the vertexes. And there is an option here under item called tilt. And what we can do with that is we can basically rotate this spline around. So I'm going to type in 90 to tilt it 90 degrees. And now you can see the extrusion is flat on the surface. Now I'm going to hit G and Z just to bring it up off the ground a little bit, so there's no clipping between the two planes. All right, now I'm going to go into the top-down view, and I'll just get rid of these windows so that we can see really clearly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, and I need to hit E to extrude. And then in this top view, so I get to the top view by hitting 7 on my number keypad, but you can also do it by just clicking on the Z on your little widget here, so you can move your view around with this thing. So if you're on a laptop, that's probably the best way to do it. Anyway, so I hit E to extrude, and I'm just going to position this guy. Let's see, grab X and E and grab Y, just like this, just creating a bit of a microchip pattern. And just zoom it way off into the distance there. All right, that's pretty good. Should be far enough. Okay, so now we've got this one patterned line. And now what we can do is come over here, add in an array modifier. Now we're going to turn off relative offset because we want to use constant offset. We want to offset it at a constant rate, not based on the size of the object. And I'm just going to bring this first distance right down so that it's really close on the X. And then I'm going to take the Y and I'll bring it up a little bit, just so it looks kind of evenly spaced. Now we're getting some weird edges here. You see how this is kind of like giving me a bank on the corner, right? So if I go over to my resolution preview, I can turn this number up in my path object, and you can see it's going to make those corners sharp. All right, so now back with my array modifier, I can just continue to adjust these until they look like they're kind of spaced well enough. Now what I can do is I can increase the count. So I can go way up, make a big set of these guys. And now I can bring it in, so on the X, just so it's tucked inside there and we can't see that slope. Now I've got a microchip line. Now what I can do is I can take this system and I can duplicate it. So I can come over here and I can hit Shift D and I can grab on the Y and move it over so it lines up. And I can go into edit mode and I can delete all these points. Delete vertices with X. And now I can just hit E to extrude and I can position these any way I want. But now you'll notice if I'm going this way with this group, it starts to overlap, right? So that means that what you need to do is for the individual groups, we actually need to change the pattern for the constant offset. So if I just come over here like that, so I can just position this so that it looks right on this side. Now we will need to move this group over since we're doing it like that. So I need to move it over just a little bit. Cool. And now I can use this to continue to flesh out my design. Okay, now that I've got two of these modeled out, I can select both of them, hit Shift D and rotate on the Z 90 degrees, and then position these guys using X and Y inside the object like so. I'm just going to make sure they fit. Now, I've got a few sections where they're overlapping, so I'm just going to come in and change these. So grab X, slide this over. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is put a material on all these guys. So I'm going to switch back over to my rendered view, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on the ceiling again. And I'll select my NURBS path, and I'll click New, and I will come over here and give some emission to these guys. So like a bit of a blue emissive surface. I'm going to keep the principal BSDF for this one, so I can have a little bit of roughness on them as well, and I'll turn the strength up so they glow. And then what I can do is I can select all of my NURBS paths like this, control click that last one, and go right here, copy material to selected. And that will copy the material that I have on the last object that I selected. It'll copy it over to all the others. So there we go. All right, it's looking good. Now, the next thing we need to do is to have some particles that travel along these lanes. So let's do that next. And we're going to have to do this with a little bit of a trick. So I'm going to take all these NURBS paths. I'm going to click my collection button, and I'm going to drag all these in here, and I'll call this my wires. collection. And I'm just going to hide that there. Now I need to take these wires and I need to select all of them and I need to hit Shift D over in the viewport to duplicate them. And then what I can do is I can create another collection and I can drag all these guys into that new collection. Now, this collection thing is just to help me keep organized so I know which one's which. That's really the only purpose I'm going to use it for. Now, we need to combine all these into one object so that we can use them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first hit F3. I'm going to type convert, and I'm going to convert all these curves into mesh. All right, so now they're all mesh objects. They look exactly the same, but they're all mesh objects. Now that they're mesh, I can join them. So you can't join curves, right? If you have a bunch of curves, select them, and I go join, they're not going to combine into one object. It doesn't work. So we have to turn it into mesh first. So I've done that. So now I'm going to hit F3 and type join. Bam, now it's all just one object. You can see that here. It's just this one big mesh object. But now I'm going to use this to drive a particle system. And particles have a cool trick where they can follow a curve, right? But I don't have a curve. I've got this giant mesh object. How do I get back to a curve? Well, we can just do the same thing we did a second ago. We hit F3, convert to curve, and bam, now this is actually one giant curve. So if I hide my wires collection, you can see what it's done is it's taken the geometry and it's turned it into all these NURBS curves, right? So there's no mesh now anymore, but it's also this double line thing. It's not just a single line. That may not be what you're after if you're wanting something a bit more specific, but in our case, this is actually going to work. So let's turn our wires back on, and I'm going to call this NURBS path. I'm going to call this my particle path. Now I need to create a particle system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Shift A and I'm going to create a mesh. I'll go for a cube and I'll scale it down and I'll just kind of scale it on the Z. I'll just hide it inside the microchip. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to turn on particles here for this thing. Now we're going to keep all this stuff pretty much the same, except I'm going to take my frame start and make it -200 so that it basically starts emitting 200 frames before we begin our animation. So that way, when we start playing, you'll have particles everywhere. You don't have to wait for them to kind of propagate out. So the next thing I want to do is change my lifetime. I'm going to take it up to, I'll try 500 so that they live a while, and I'll keep the number at 1,000. Now we're going to come down to, let's see, force field, no, field weights. Here it is, field weights, and we're going to turn gravity off for our scene. You can see them there. They're starting to appear. And if I play now, they're just kind of like flying around, being shot out of the different faces of our cube. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my curve right here, the particle path, and I'm going to come over to this right here, the physics tab. And I'm going to click on force field. We're going to turn this curve into a force field. We'll leave it set to force, and we're going to change the shape from point to curve. Now, what's going to happen is it's going to start repelling all these particles. So it's going to be driving the particles away at a strength of 1. We want to attract them. We want the particles to be attracted to our curve. So I'm going to set my strength to -5. And I'm going to turn the flow all the way up. The flow basically kind of slows down the movement of things and kind of creates a bit more control. I'm going to max it out at 10. So now you can see all these particles are going to be following the curves really nicely. Now, if you notice, when I start, they're not fully out at the ends. So that'd be a good chance to come over back to my emitter, come over here, and let's take the frame start to like -400. And then we need to increase the lifetime so to at least 600. I'll just do 700 to be safe. Okay, so to really see what's happening, sometimes just playing it live in your timeline doesn't give you a really accurate, up-to-date demonstration of what's happening. Sometimes it can get a bit confused jumping around and stuff. So it's a really good idea to cache your particles to kind of get a sense of what they're actually looking like. So I'm going to open up the cache dropdown and I'm going to click bake. Caching is just a term for saving the emission, the particles and their physics and everything they do. So it goes through for every particle and it makes a file and it saves the position information for all of them for every frame. So it doesn't have to do any calculations. It could just play those positions back to you. So it's a way of speeding the process up and giving you a really accurate sense of how it's working. So we can hit play here and we can see we've got all these different particle pieces. You can see they're moving up and down all around the place. And it's a nice little effect. All right, now let's create a particle to use. Right now, these are all just placeholders, these little spheres. So I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to create a UV sphere. Now you can bring down this little drop down menu. I'll just move my face there so you can see. We've got segments set to 32. I can drop this down because we don't need a lot. So I might just go 5 and 5. That should be enough for this object. Maybe a bit more. Let's do 7 and 7. That looks a little bit better. All right, cool. Now, with that done, what we can do is we can take this object and we can come over here, create a new material, switch it to emission, just like we did before. And we can turn it right up so it's glowing. Go for like a bit of a blue. And then we can scale it down. And we can just move this out of the way, right? Because we actually don't want to see this object. I'm going to rename it particle. And then I'm going to go to my cube. I'll also rename my cube emitter, just so it's really clear what's going on. And I'll come down all the way to the bottom of my particle settings to render. Open up that tab. We're going to switch from halo to object. And I'm going to select my particle object. If you can't find it in the list, you can actually just type. And there you go. Now the particle object is being emitted on all of these sections here. So what we can do is we can change our scale here now underneath this until we get something that looks right. And that's pretty cool. So we can have a look at that. We've got these little particles now traveling across our network, which is really what we wanted. Looks good. All right, now let's come back over to here and I'm going to select my NURBS path and I'm going to change some of my colors here to get this image looking right. So I'm going to push these into a really saturated blue. And I might turn the emission strength down just a little bit. Now, the next thing I want to do is set up some connectors for my CPU chip. So I'm going to jump back into flat shaded mode, select I'll turn on my visible things here, and select my microchip. And I'm going to hit Shift A. Actually, what I'll do is I'll come to here. I'll go into edit mode and I'll select this vertex. And I'll hold down Shift S. And I can put my cursor to selected. That'll put my 3D cursor exactly where that point is. I can leave edit mode. Now I can hit Shift A and I can create a cube. And it's going to create the cube wherever my 3D cursor is, right? So it's put it right there, which is exactly in line with this section of this wire, which is really useful. Because now what I can do is I can use this to set it up. Now we can scale this up. We can grab this on the X and let's see, I'll go into edit mode and just create a little bit of shape to this thing. I'm going to hit E to extrude, grab Z and then grab X and just drag it in like so. So it kind of comes out a little bit. I'll fit a little bit out, maybe so there's a gap. And then I'll go into edit mode, select all, scale on the Y, and just kind of narrow it down so it's a similar length to the actual wire there. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to create an array modifier. And I'm going to set the array to go along the Y. And I'll just drag this out a little bit so that it lines up with this second wire. So I can just hold down Shift and drag till it gets just right. And then I can roll these out till we get right to the end. And I can adjust this a little bit further just so that it's fairly close. Doesn't have to be perfect. Great. Now we can take this and probably assign the same material that we've got to our microchip. So O2, I think would make sense. So I'm going to take that, assign it there, and I Shift D, rotate Z 90, and I'll just move these around so that I can have them in the scene in the right spot. So I'll position these. All right, great. Now let's take this sun lamp that we've got and let's add a bit of color to it. So I'm going to maybe go into this hot neon pink color and I'll rotate it around and find a good spot for it so it starts to kind of glint a little bit. I want to get some light shining off the floor. I think that would look good. All right, great. Now, one other thing we want to do is have this animated pattern in the glowing lines in our object here, the floor and the ceiling. So I'm going to bring my shader editor back out, and we're going to do a cool little trick to make this work. So in order to get this pattern to move, I want to actually move the mapping coordinate for this bit of our texture. So if I come over here and I move it up on the Z, so hold on Shift and drag. You can see that it really starts going nuts, and it's going to create some really cool effects for us. So I click Z right here, and we type the pound symbol, and we can type frame, and that's going to create a driver that takes the frame number and inserts it here. So right now you can see 114 and 114. That's the frame they're on. This is going to move way too fast for us. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to type in the star key to multiply, and I'm going to go 0.001 just to make it a lot smaller. And now we hit play. You can see these lines are all moving at a much more tolerable rate. You could probably slow it down even more, maybe 0.005. Yeah, it looks a bit better. That's really cool. Now to finish this off, let's take our camera and let's rotate the angle a little bit just to kind of make it look cool. Now, one last thing I want to do is add in a bit more light to my scene. So I'm just going to select my microchip. I'm going to Shift S, cursor to selected, Shift A, and I'm going to add in an area light. And then I'm going to grab it on the Z and bring it up so that I can see it in my scene. I'll put it just up here, kind of off the top so that it's not visible in the fog. Find a good spot for it. Needs to sit just above, just kind of like, you know, I want to make sure it doesn't go through the roof. So I'll bring the power down and I might set this to be like a blue color as well. Like so. I can change the size of it and that's going to affect the reflection. I can also change what I want it to be. So I'm going to make it a disk. And then I'm going to click on my floor material and I'm going to turn my roughness up a little bit just to blur that reflection. And I think I want to take my scale down on my Voronoi. So I'll just bring that scale down even further. And I might bring these a touch closer to each other so it's a bit more of a fine pattern. And if I play with my color as well, we can get a sense of what things would look like. I might turn metallic up as well for this material. I think that could look good. Okay, now to really sell this thing and bring it home, let's take our camera and let's turn on depth of field and let's set our focus distance. Now first we'll set our f-stop to like 0.5, I'd say, and then let's change our focus distance just to be right on the corner of our cube. So I'm just gonna drag this number around until it looks about right. I could select the cube, but I want to focus just on that point there. So just getting that looking good. And there we go. Now we can animate the camera if we want. Come back here, hit I to set a keyframe for location and rotation. Go to the last frame, move around, lock our camera to view. Don't forget to do that. And then move around to a cool spot and hit I to set a keyframe. And there you have it, a full microchip landscape. I hope you learned a lot through this tutorial and you gained some really cool tips that you can use for your own projects. Please let me know what you think of this in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out when I release new tutorials or go live when I record these. Try and catch those. If you want to get the full live streams yourself, head over to Patreon. You can get them you can join up there to get a hold of them, or you can also find them on YouTube by becoming a channel member at the All Access Pass and Higher. Don't forget to check out the Blender Market as well. Check out C. Bailey Film on the creators page. There's some cool stuff I've got there for you. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to catch you in the next one. Until then, have a fantastic week. See ya.